Book review, Waste Wars. The Wild Afterlife of Your Trash author Alexander Clapp and Waste Wars. The Wild Afterlife of Your Trash journalist Alexander Clapp delivers a gripping, globe-spanning expose that delves into one of the most underreported but urgent crises of our time, the hidden, hazardous journey of the world's waste. With reporter's precision and storyteller's flair, Clapp travels from the fetid shores of Albania to the waste hubs of Ghana on trail of environmental devastation, geopolitical conflict, and human exploitation that our garbage leaves behind. This isn't just a book about trash. It's mirrored to our consumption, damning account of global inequality and disturbing glimpse into the commodification of waste. What makes Waste Wars truly exceptional is its blend of on-the-ground reporting, historical investigation, and philosophical reflection. Clapp doesn't just trace where garbage goes. He explores what it means and how it exposes the contradictions of modern civilization. Plot summary: Alexander Clapp's Waste Wars. The Wild Afterlife of Your Trash is an eye-opening, deeply investigative nonfiction work that reads with the urgency and global sprawl of geopolitical thriller. Through vivid reporting, Clapp unmasks the murky, often sinister systems that govern the fate of trash, especially that produced by affluent nations, and reveals how the detritus of consumerism becomes commodity in vast, underregulated internet economy. This book is not merely about garbage. It is about power, inequality, deception, and the global cost of convenience. The book opens with myth-busting premise. Most of what Western consumers believe about recycling and sustainability is either incomplete or flatly incorrect. Clapp argues that the comforting blue bins of suburbia obscure a much darker truth, one in which trash is exported under the guise of recycling, only to be dumped, burned, or informally processed in countries least equipped to deal with the consequences. The author begins by outlining the psychological comfort that recycling provides to individuals in the global north. Yet beneath the surface, he exposes a sophisticated network of waste traffickers, complicit corporations, and officials who allow trash to journey across oceans with little regard for legality or ethics. Clapp embarks on global odyssey to trace the physical and economic paths of this garbage. Each chapter explores different geographical and thematic axes of the global waste industry. In Ghana, Clapp visits Agbeblashi, a notorious digital dump where young workers dismantle old computers, televisions, and smartphones exported from Europe and North America. These electronics, many of which are labeled reusable or refurbished, are instead stripped for valuable metals in toxic conditions. The chapter becomes meditation on the human cost of the information age, where the same devices that connect the world are responsible for poison its most vulnerable workers. In Turkey, Clapp examines the massive shipbreaking industry where decommissioned freighters from wealthy nations are sent to be taken apart. This practice, which involves exposing workers to asbestos, heavy metals, and other dangerous materials, is a chilling metaphor for industrial capitalism's out of sight, out of mind ethos. But it also highlights how waste is not always just plastic or paper. It can be rusted steel, leaking oil, or toxic paint scraped from ghost ships. In Indonesia, Clapp turns his attention to paper and plastic recycling. Once a relatively clean and productive sector, Indonesia's recycling industry has been overwhelmed by mislabeled plastic waste sent from the United States and Europe. He visits communities where villagers burn imported plastic packaging for cooking fuel, choking their lungs in the air with carcinogens. This section not only addresses the environmental damage of plastics, but also developed countries exploit loopholes in international environmental treaties like the Basel Convention. In Guatemala and Tanzania, Clapp exposes more covert layer of the waste trade: illicit dumping, fraudulent paperwork, and the political complicity that allows it all to happen. These case studies illustrate how some governments, often cash-strapped or politically unstable, willingly or unknowingly become dumping grounds for waste rejected elsewhere. Clapp also situates his narrative within historical context. He discusses the infamous 1986 voyage of the Kind Sea ship carrying Philadelphia's incinerator ash that was refused by multiple countries and eventually dumped illegally in Haiti and the Indian Ocean. This case becomes emblematic of the broader waste wars, an ongoing battle where trash is created and where it is finally buried, burned, or dismembered. Throughout the book, Clapp returns to several key themes. He critiques the commodification of waste, showing how trash becomes source of profit for shadowy middlemen and multinational corporations. He explores the environmental racism inherent in the waste trade, where the pollution generated by the global north disproportionately impacts the global south. And he reflects on the circular hypocrisy of consumer culture, where the illusion of sustainability allows for the continued overproduction of disposable goods. Ultimately, Waste Wars is A sobering call to action, Clapp argues that real change will not come from better recycling slogans or consumer guilt, but from structural reforms. Particularly extended producer responsibility laws that force manufacturers to handle the end-of-life management of their products. He also advocates for international legal frameworks with teeth capable of holding both governments and corporations accountable. Prose is at once journalistic and literary, combining cold facts with human stories. The book doesn't just inform. It unsettles. It forces readers to confront their complicity in a global system where trash, far from disappearing, is simply hidden from view, often in the lungs and rivers of people who never consumed the products in the first place. Investigative scope. A tour through the trash planet. Clapp's global itinerary is exhaustive and shocking. He reports from Durs, Albania, where toxic waste is dumped illegally under the guise of scrap metal, Agbai Ghana, the infamous waste dump where children smelt circuit boards for copper, the Philippines, where international waste disputes ignite diplomat, Sandoffs, Malaysia, and Indonesia, where Western recyclables are burned in secret kilns at night. Each chapter reveals a facet of what Clapp terms the waste industrial complex, murky system where corruption, deregulation, and economic desperation intersect. He highlights how developed nations offload their waste, literal and moral, onto poorer countries, often via opaque supply chains and legal loopholes. Dutch electronics company or an American recycling plant may be unaware or willfully ignorant of where their waste ends up. What's remarkable is the sheer scale. Clapp estimates that global waste will triple by 2100. He notes that the recycling industry, once heralded as a sustainable solution, has become front for outsourcing pollution. This scope is what gives waste wars its chilling power. It's not just happening somewhere. It's happening everywhere. Case studies. Where the waste ends up. Among the book's most affecting sections are the vivid case studies of communities living with the aftermath of global waste flows. 1. The toxic shores of Albania. In one standout chapter, Clapp profiles Durs, coastal city where trash washes ashore daily. He interviews local fishermen who now catch plastic bags and syringes more often than fish. Clapp links this pollution to illegal shipments from Italy and Greece, exposing how mafias and corrupt officials profit from environmental degradation. This section combines narrative journalism with forensic reporting. Clapp even attempts to trace a single shipping container marked recyclable plastic and discovers that it contains not just plastic but hospital waste and industrial solvents. Evidence of systemic fraud. 2. Ghana's children in the waste inferno. Clapp's reporting in Agbai is harrowing. He spends time with teenagers who dismantle computers with rocks and burn wires to extract copper. The air is thick with dioxins and lead particles. Many of the workers suffer from respiratory illnesses, but the money, barely a few dollars a day, is often the only income available. He interviews a 14-year-old named Isaac who dreams of escaping but knows his body won't hold up much longer. Clapp connects Isaac's plight to the consumer habits of people halfway across the world who discard their electronics every 2 years in pursuit of upgrades. Environmental and political insights. Clapp is not content to simply report what he sees. He interrogates the structures that make such exploitation possible. One of the books seizes that waste is political. He demonstrates how treaties like the Basel Convention, intended to regulate cross-border waste trade, are routinely violated or skirted by ambiguous labeling, used goods versus waste, and the lack of enforcement mechanisms. He also dives into the economics of trash, showing how certain countries, notably China before 2018, built industries on importing recyclables from the West, often to feed manufacturing sectors. The ripple effects of China's national sword policy, which banned most waste imports, are examined in depth, revealing how the West scrambled to find new dumping grounds, often in Southeast Asia. Clapp argues convincingly that waste is a form of neocolonialism. Wealthy nations externalize their environmental costs while poor ones bear the health consequences. Trash in this context becomes vector of power imbalance and economic coercion. Ethical undercurrents. What are we really throwing away? Though Clapp's tone is often journalistic, Waste Wars is not without moral weight. There's deep ethical unease running through the book about our complicity, our ignorance, and our indifference. He questions the idea that individual recycling habits can make difference in system rigged for mass consumption and planned obsolescence. In one striking passage, he compares the waste crisis to climate change. Invisible, incremental, but ultimately catastrophic. Both crises of modernity requiring not just technical solutions, but cultural shifts in how we value material goods, how we define responsibility, and how we reckon with our footprint. One particularly haunting moment comes when Clapp visits a landfill outside Manila and sees workers scavenging through diapers and dead animals for anything of value, he writes. Here, the world's waste is not just sorted but lived. Its sentence that lingers, narrative voice and style, engaged in urgent. Clapp's prose is clear, vivid, and charged with urgency. He writes with the precision of journalists, but occasionally veers into the poetic, especially when environmental ruin, broken refrigerator floating in polluted river comes, an altar to entropy. Burning field of plastic smells like the inside of chemistry lab swallowed by hell. What distinguishes Clapp's voice is its humane attention to the people caught in the waste economy. He's not just looking for headlines. He listens, asks questions, and includes voices we rarely hear. Dockworkers, scavengers, local activists, customs officers. This people-first approach lends the book emotional weight and narrative complexity. Stylistic structure and thematic coherence. Waste Wars is structured thematically rather than chronologically or Each chapter focuses on specific angle of the trash economy, toxic waste, plastic pollution, electronic waste, landfill labor, recycling, fraud, and international treaties. The chapters build upon one another, creating cumulative sense of both horror and revelation. Throughout, Clapp returns to key themes: invisibility, trash disappears from our lives but not from the world; displacement, waste is exported from wealthy communities to poor ones; denial, recycling often serves as a moral fig leaf for overconsumption. The final chapter synthesized these insights into a call to reimagine waste not as an afterthought, but as a central element of how societies function or fail. Weaknesses and gaps. No book of this ambition is without its limitations. Some readers may wish for more policy discussion or potential solutions. Clapp doesn't dwell on what individuals or governments can realistically do, though he hints at possibilities. Extended producer responsibility, circular economies, stricter enforcement of international law. Likewise, the book can sometimes feel overwhelming in its litany of despair. The portraits. Environmental collapse are powerful but relentless. Brief chapter on success stories. Like that. Zero waste movements in parts of Japan or localized cleanup efforts might have offered balance without diminishing the book's overall impact. Finally, the book could have more fully addressed the role of corporations, particularly in the tech and packaging industries. While there are mentions of Apple, Samsung, and Nestle, deeper investigation into how these companies shape waste streams would have enriched the narrative. Conclusion. Necessary book for an age of waste wars. The wild afterlife of your trash's wake-up call disguised as an adventure. It's rare work of nonfiction that both informs and implicates. Tells us that every item we throw away is part of a larger story. With power, profit, pollution, and poverty, this book challenges readers to look beyond the blue bin and ask harder questions. Where does it go? Who pays the price? And what kind of world are we building on top of our ruins? In the end, Waste Wars is not just about trash. It's about how we live, and if we're lucky, it might help us live differently.